Welcome to this first of two sessions looking at our history and the history of Aiken in connection with the Centennial celebration. My name is Bill Schuster, and I have the honor of following a century of noteworthy leaders as the president of Congregation Adath Yeshurun. I also have the distinction for the first time in our history of telling congregants to stay home, that we're not holding services. However, you all know why, as no aspect of any of our lives has managed to avoid being affected by COVID. Such is the legacy of 2020. I can only hope that you've kept your health and otherwise made the best of this challenging situation. Fortunately, technology has given us the means for virtual meetings such as this, which can help mitigate the impact of delaying some of the celebrations. Another interesting element is that we've seen, even on our own online services, increased participation as people are able to partake from the comfort of their own homes, as well as people being able to participate who are not here in Aiken. Many people have worked very hard putting the overall Centennial program together, but rather than failing to do justice to them, I'm going to turn this over to Steve Silver. Before he comes on, I want to remind you that as good as the technology is, it has some limitations. To overcome at least one of these, I encourage you to mute unless you are the speaker. Lastly, I want you to know that this session is being recorded. Over to you, Steve.
Great, thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see such a nice turnout, and I have to thank Bill for the image that's behind me, which for those of you who may not recognize it, this is the interior of the sanctuary at Adath Yeshurun Synagogue. So it's amazing what technology can do. Hopefully that continues as we go through this this process. But let me begin by giving a little background on the project that you're now all a part of. And it was about 3 years ago that several members of the synagogue here in Aiken, and that includes Doris Baumgarten, who was just talking, and Della Hertzberg and myself, were in Charleston at a meeting of the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina. It was at that meeting that we saw the work that the society had done in chronicling the role of Jewish merchants in towns throughout South Carolina, work that resulted in the opening of an exhibit at the College of Charleston called A Store at Every Crossroads. And that work was both the inspiration and the foundation of this project. I'm not totally sure why I'm seeing Bill's picture up on the screen, but that's all to the good. And our goal was to produce something similar that told the story of the Aiken Jewish community, and to share that story as part of our plans to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the synagogue here. Now, COVID has gotten in the way of some of those plans, as you know, and we've postponed the opening of our exhibit at the Aiken County Historical Museum until next year. But certainly we're happy to have the opportunity today to share some of this story with you in a virtual setting. And next, let me thank the many partners that have helped us in this effort. And that begins with the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina, which had done prior research, which some of you participated in, on the Aiken Jewish community, and had published stories on the early Aiken Jewish families in its biannual magazine. And special shout out to Rachel Barnett, who led the Jewish Merchant Project, and also Dale Rosengarten, who some of you know, who runs special collections at the Addleston Library at the College of Charleston. But it also includes the Aiken County Historical Museum that agreed to host our exhibit and supported our research with access to new material from its archives, some of which you'll see today, as well as agreeing to loan artifacts which exist in the museum's special permanent collection, which will be in the exhibit next year. And Lauren Virgo, who's the executive director of the museum, has been a strong and, in our case, flexible supporter in terms of agreeing to move the date of the exhibit. And it includes Alan Riddick, who runs the Aiken County Historical Society. Alan has been a source of some great archival photos of Lawrence Street back in the day, and And he's also been the point person in our efforts to have a new historical marker placed in downtown Aiken that will highlight the contributions of Jewish merchants here, a marker that we hope to unveil next year when we're all together. And it includes a series of organizations that have helped us get the word out about this project. The Friends of the Aiken County Historical Museum, Aiken Historic Foundation, the Aiken Chamber of Commerce, the Augusta Jewish Museum, various Augusta synagogues and area churches, as well as Aiken Interfaith Partners and Interfaith Partners of South Carolina. And it includes civic leaders in Aiken, like Mayor Rick Osborne and David Jameson, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, who supported our effort with letters of support when we went searching for some money to support this project. And it especially includes the organizations that agreed to support this effort with funding. The Southern Jewish Historical Society gave us some money, as did South Carolina Humanities, which gave a major grant to us, which allowed us to expand the scope of the project and also gave us the financial flexibility to adapt some of our plans as we've all dealt with the pandemic. It's a long list of thank yous. I feel a little bit like a politician at the beginning of a campaign speech. But I hope it gives a sense of the breadth and depth of collaboration and support that we've had in this effort, and hopefully reflects a broad interest in this story amongst a wide range of audiences. And in that spirit, and I haven't looked again at who's online, but I had talked with Dr. Tom Mack, who runs and chairs the board at SC Humanities, and he was going to say a few words about this project from his perspective as a funder. So Tom, if you're on the line and can unmute yourself, it'd be great if you could say a few words at this point. We will see. I'm looking on the participant list. See if he's signed in.
Have I unlocked the mute function?
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. Very good.
Very good. Well, greetings, everyone. I've been asked to say a few words on behalf of the Board of Directors of South Carolina Humanities, which is our state's program of the National Endowment for the Humanities. SC Humanities receives federal funds every year to dispense to cultural organizations around the state. And in fact, so far this year, we've awarded 3 grants to Aiken County organizations. We gave the Aiken County Historical Museum a major grant in order to revise their county exhibit, because this year is Aiken County's 150th anniversary. In fact, I wrote a column about that topic maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago in the Aiken Standard. We also gave a grant to the Arts and Heritage Center in North Augusta because they're doing a new exhibit on the town of Hamburg, which was the predecessor to the establishment of North Augusta back in the 1890s. And of course, your congregation received a major grant from us in acknowledgement of really your generous decision to expand your anniversary celebration by mounting a series of public programs that provide a deeper understanding of our collective past. The mission of South Carolina Humanities is to inspire, engage, and enrich the lives of South Carolinians through the thoughtful programming of public humanities events. And we are proud, really, to support your congregation and your anniversary celebration. Best wishes to all the fine folks at the congregation of Adath Yeshurun. May your next 100 years be as blessed as your past century. Happy anniversary from South Carolina Humanities.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your kind words and support. So our program today is going to be divided into two parts. First, I'm going to share some highlights from the exhibit that's going to open at the museum next year. And in this session, we're going to focus on the earlier history of the Aiken Jewish community. And that's a period that actually dates back further than we understood, to the 1850s. And up through around 1950, which was the peak of the Jewish merchant activity here in Aiken. We're going to have a second session, as we've let folks know, that's going to be in about a month. That's going to deal with focusing on some of the history from then up until today. And then after I go through some of that material, we're going to have several members of the community share their personal experiences and family stories, some of whom were chatting for those who are on the line as we got this program going. I'll introduce those as we get to that point, but each of those speakers either grew up here in Aiken or have family connections that date well back in time here and are sort of part of the story that we're talking about. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for some Q&A. So to begin my part, I'm going to share my screen, and this is where hopefully the technology is of help. And I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can do this properly. Yeah, that's the wrong screen. Here we go. All right. Let's see. Share screen. Click on that and share. Let's see what comes up onto the screen. So what you have here before you is a connection to our new 100th anniversary website, which is at the web address asourceoflight.org. And that website I'm going to use today to tell some of this story, but it's available to anyone now who wants to learn more about the history of the Aiken Jewish community or preview some of the content that'll be at the exhibit at the Aiken County Historical Museum next year. There's a lot to look at on this site, and as I said, I'm going to take you through some of that, but if you're going to look at anything, if you click down here on the homepage and you click where it says learn more about Aiken's Jewish history, you'll be taken to a video. And I'm not going to play the video now, but there's a nice short video that we've put together that tells the story that will be in the exhibit next year that you can get a sense of. And just another quick word about the theme that we've created for this centennial set of celebration and for the exhibit, this name that we're calling all of this a source of light. And we think that this idea of a source of light is an overall message of the story of the Aiken Jewish community. At one level, it's a story that I think anyone can relate to and admire. The Aiken Jewish community was about hard work, about a focus on faith and family, about respecting others, and about contributing to the greater good. But at the same time, we think there's an even more timely message that comes from this story, and that's a message of tolerance and inclusion here in Aiken that is reflected in this story, and that we hope can be a source of light to all of us in the future. So with that, I'm gonna now start to take you through at least a little bit of what's in this site. And I'm going to start by saying a little bit about what we learned about Aiken's earliest Jewish residents. And as I said, when we started this work, we thought that the story of the Aiken Jewish community really began in the 1890s, and the time period where the first merchants' families arrived, who themselves were ultimately the ones that founded the synagogue here. We found an interesting set of stories that go back quite a bit further, and one of those comes from a Jewish national newspaper published out of New York called the Asmonean. And there's an article that you can see here that was an editorial in that paper on August 22nd, 1856. And what this article talks about is it's lauding the role of several Israelite families in Aiken in supporting fundraising efforts. And those fundraising efforts went to support the building of the first Methodist Episcopal Church in town. And so not to go through it all, but you can see here, at least in the middle, the instance in which they're calling attention is a fancy fair, which was the fundraiser held at Aiken, South Carolina, and which several Israelite families were most active in promoting, and then goes on to explain more about that. So, so even as far back as the 1850s, there was a Jewish community here, and that Jewish community here was connected with and supportive of the broader Aiken community. And the other little piece of information that we ended up finding that also is part of an interfaith story is what you see in front of you here is an entry from the diary of a guy by the name of John Cornish. John Cornish was the pastor of St. Thaddeus Church, which many people know in town here, from 1846 to 1860. And his diary includes a number of entries about interactions with Jewish families who came to his church for services. It was the only established religious institution in the town at the time. It also documents an interaction and a relationship that he built over time. This is John Cornish with a guy by the name of Gustav Poznanski, which some of you who may know a bit about Southern Jewish history, Gustav Poznanski was a pretty prominent rabbi in Charleston in the 1840s, who was an early leader in the movement of Reform Judaism down in Charleston. He was actually pushed out by his synagogue there for people thinking that he went too far in his reforms. And after that, he came and lived and spent considerable time in Aiken, at least part of the year. And at least we have entries from 1854 through 1856. And the entry that you hear in front of him is he's recounting a 2-hour conversation that John Cornish had with Rabbi Poznanski, where Rabbi Poznanski was lamenting his treatment amongst his parishioners in Charleston. But again, showing a sense of cooperation amongst the faiths here in Aiken, way back in town. And we don't know much more about the specific Jewish residents at that time, but certainly that theme of interfaith cooperation is one that is notable, from that period. So moving on from that into the history that at least a number of folks on this call are a little bit more familiar with, we're going to go to the Aiken's earliest. We're going to go. Sorry about that. We're going to go to the first Jewish merchants in Aiken, and the earliest known Jewish merchant in Aiken is an ancestor of Nelson Danish, who's going to be speaking later, was Harris Lewis, or H.L. Polaire. And he opened a dry goods store here in Aiken as early as 1888. And his obituary that we have a copy of says he first went to Cleveland, and then he was in Augusta for 4 years before coming to Aiken. But he's the earliest known Jewish merchant in Aiken. And he was followed here by his brother, Morris, or M.S. Polaire, who had a barbershop here in town. Both of these stores were on what is today Lawrence Street, actually across the street from each other. So he had a barbershop. And then also important to the story, his wife also had a millinery store next door to the barbershop. But also important to the story is that HL's brother-in-law, Benedict Morris, or B.M. Saraski, also came to Aiken in the 1890s. So B.M. Saraski had, and you'll hear a lot, obviously, about the Saraski name, had married Harris Lewis, or HL's sister, Anna. And so he came to America because of HL's having preceded him here, and he came to work in HL's dry goods store. So those are sort of the very earliest Jewish merchants to come to Aiken. And they actually had stores relatively early, but a number of the other early Jewish merchants came here as peddlers. And we were very lucky that the Aiken County Historical Museum had recently been given an archive of peddler licenses from Aiken, the Aiken County offices, which was trying to eliminate, I guess, some things that were in storage, and these turned out to be very interesting and very, very valuable. And what we ended up finding when we looked into that archive of peddler licenses was peddler licenses for a number of what became the prominent Jewish families here in Aiken. And what you see on the screen here is the first two of three Polyakov peddler licenses that we found in that archive. The first of which is for S. Polyakov, was Samuel, that dating back to 1894. And then Jacob, or J.S. Polyakov, from 1897. And then last, Morris, may not be Morris, Moses, M. Polyakov, which dates to 1901. So all three of them were peddlers here in Aiken County. And the peddlers in Aiken County mostly served the mill workers in the Midland Valley between Aiken and Augusta. So there's a whole series of cotton mills in that area. And the peddlers would be out to serve the mill workers in those towns like Graniteville. Now, the Polyakovs went on to become a major merchant family throughout South Carolina. In particular, Samuel Polyakov left town in the mid-1900s after he did open a store here in town. And his brother David, who we're told by the family also was with him in Graniteville, left around the same time, and they went on to open stores in Lawrence and Greenville and Anderson and Abbeville. But Jacob Polyakov and Moses Polyakov stayed in Aiken, and they opened stores in town here. And then the second family who we found peddler licenses for were additional members of the Saraski family. So remember that B.M. Saraski was working in H.L. Polar's dry goods store, but he had four brothers and a sister who we'll hear about later. But the four brothers followed him to Aiken and started to work as peddlers. And here you see Sam Saraski and Hiram, or H.C. Saraski's peddler licenses from around 1900. And again, as we'll talk, the Saraski family, went on to play a central role in the religious, commercial, and civic life here in Aiken. And then the third family that we see a peddler license for is the Wolf family. And this is a peddler license for Sam Wolf. Sam Wolf went on to live in Johnston and was an important merchant in Edgefield. But his brother Jacob Wolf, who was also with him in the Graniteville area, we know from the census records around 1900, was here, and he and his wife, Jacob, and his wife Julia became important merchants here in Aiken, each with stores that operated for over 50 years. So that's a bit of the story of the first merchants. And so by 1920, as based on their success, we find that there were already 10 Jewish merchant stores here in Aiken. And there was a natural evolution from being a peddler to opening a store in Aiken. And in fact, it was, as I mentioned, several of these same families or other individuals that ended up opening stores here. And we actually have profiles of each of these stores with archival photographs where we have them, or advertisements or newspaper articles that we found. And you can look at those. But I'm going to focus on just a couple of them, really expanding a bit more on the story of the Saraski family. And there were two Saraski stores side by side in this sort of 1920 period on Lawrence Street, and the first of them was both called with very confusingly similar names. The first one is called Saraski's. And that store was the store that B.M. Saraski went and opened up on his own. And that store is in the current location, for those who know Aiken, of Malia's restaurant. And here you can see an advertisement from 1904 when this store first opened, for Saraski's department store, B.M. Saraski, proprietor. And we can see here from 1926 that B.M. Saraski ended up buying the building that store is located in for $11,000. And those in the Polikoff family will see there was a little second mention in that article about the purchase of property on Pendleton Street, which is the home of the Polikoffs. But that's a bit of an aside. So that's a bit of one of the Saraski stores that was on Lawrence Street. Let me just go back here. And then right next door to that was a store called Saraski Brothers Department Store. And Saraski Brothers Department Store was in the location that it was actually had covered two storefronts. So it's in the location that covered from what's currently the home design store Folly through to the next door store, Concierge Real Estate. And here's a picture. This store was operated by three of the brothers, Solomon, Sam, and Hiram, or HC. So here's a picture of them outside that store circa 1914. And an ad for that store kind of circa 1907. And as another bit of trivia, I guess, around those stores, at a later point, just after this, the Saraski brothers divided their business, and they split this Saraski brothers store into two stores. And so there was an HC Saraski store that was in the location of Follies, and Sol and Sam Saraski's store that was in the location of Concierge Real Estate, and B.M. Saraski operating in what is now Malia's restaurant. So you had three Saraski stores side by side in Aiken in the 1920s. And you know, not all was all love and harmony in those time periods. Stephen Saraski may talk about this a bit later, but the story of the fifth Saraski brothers, Abraham, is a tragedy that, again, he may touch on later, but just to quickly sort of set the stage on that, the fifth Saraski brother was actually murdered while operating as a peddler in Aiken back in 1903. And so his story is certainly a cautionary tale that not all was peace and harmony here in Aiken back then, as it is not today. But what I think is even more remarkable is that the Saraski family not only stayed in Aiken, with that life experience, but actually went on to become very important civic leaders in the community here. B.M. Saraski served on city council for 10 years. He was chair of the finance committee for most of that time, and his son Mandel also served on city council, was elected mayor of Aiken in 1941, was chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Merchants Association, as well as being a leader in a number of charitable institutions. And as I mentioned, we are in process and have various approvals for putting a historic marker downtown that'll recognize the contributions of all the Jewish merchants here in town. Although our plan is to place that marker near the location of those three Saraski stores. So I'm checking on how I'm doing on time. I will try to keep this moving. So it's really in that period that 1900 to 1920 that as the community was establishing itself, that we see the first set of actions toward formalizing the community and in fact building a synagogue. And the very first nice picture of the synagogue. The first evidence that we have of that actually dates back to 1907, where there's a newspaper clipping about a meeting of an organization that was called the Children of Israel, but that was the beginnings of an effort to build a synagogue here. And you can see who some of the supporters were at that meeting, which are the same families and businesses that we've been talking about. B.M. Saraski, Jacob Wolf, he makes an appearance here. J.R. Polyakov, which was the name of Jacob S. Polyakov's store. We think the R referring to his wife's, Rebecca's initials being included there. And then Saraski Brothers. So that's 1907. By 1913, money had been raised to acquire land for a Jewish burial ground here in Aiken. That burial ground, the Sons of Israel, is a part of the Bethany Cemetery that is at Lawrence Street and Hampton Avenue. And it still exists today. There are about 200 grave sites currently in the cemetery. And then it took some time to take the next step, but in fact it was the 12th of March of 1921. So we've just passed that actual date. That was when papers were filed with the state of South Carolina to formalize the creation of a congregation. The congregation at the time called Adath Yeshurun. That had state approval. And you can see some of the same names here, Polyakov, Saraski, further down, Jacob Wolf. So that was the, and it's that charter, or that the formalization of that congregation document that is the Centennial that we're celebrating here today. It actually took some time to, and here's a notice in the paper at that time that had occurred. This is, I guess, from July of that year. But it took some time to actually raise the money to actually build the synagogue, and so it wasn't until July of 1925 that we see evidence of the actual beginning of construction. And then it was actually at the High Holy Days of that year that the first services were actually conducted. So it was actually quite quick from the beginning of construction to first services, which were I think in September. And then the synagogue was formally dedicated in October of that year. And B.M. Saraski, I think, was leading services. but this shows Morris or MS Polaire as the first president. Yeah.
Silver, I'm so sorry. Can you please mute everyone because somebody is pushing paper and we can't hear you?
Okay, I thought I had done that, but let me see. Unless it's me, that's.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. All right. Good. So let me move here just a little bit more. So the Jewish community continued to grow with the city of Aiken, and some of that growth was tied to the success and the growth of the winter colony. So this is another piece of the story of the Aiken Jewish community that we'll touch on here, that had a bit to do with the growth. And I'm going to try to very quickly, for those who may not know, talk about the winter colony. And to do that, I want to go back a little bit to the history of Aiken. I know the people who live here in Aiken, largely know this story. But going back to the early 1800s, this area was nothing but farmland until in 1827, there was an announcement of the building of a rail line from Charleston up to Hamburg, which Tom Mack had mentioned earlier, on the Savannah River. And the purpose of that rail line initially was to bring cotton, which was the major crop being grown in this area, down to the port of Charleston, so that taxes could get levied on that cash crop, instead of what had been happening, which is that some of that cotton was being shipped over to the Savannah River and being floated down the Savannah to the competing port, down the Savannah River to the competing port of Savannah. And so this rail line was built, and then the rail line company, in an effort to try to drive passenger traffic on the line, actually created the town of Aiken, or the city of Aiken. They did that at the highest elevation point on the rail line, which is where the town is located now. And they did that because they thought that that would provide some relief from the heat of the summers in the Low Country. And so I'm a bit skeptical as to how much relief was actually achieved, but that was the story. And in fact, Aiken built a reputation as a bit of a health resort for folks from Charleston to come up here in the summertime. And a series of tourist hotels began to emerge in the town. The town was laid out in an attractive grid structure that still exists today, with wide avenues and green spaces between the streets called parkways. And so the town built a bit of a reputation as a health resort. And then in the 1890s, wealthy northern families started to come down here to escape the cold of winters. And that is what was the winter colony. And so you had big hotels like the Highland Park Hotel, but you had wealthy families like the Hitchcocks that owned large tracts of land very close to downtown, that had their wealthy friends building, in quotes, cottages to spend the weekend, to spend the winter here. And then to socialize and participate in equestrian sports like fox hunting and polo. And so almost all of the Jewish merchants in town have stories about the winter colony guests and the winter colony residents and their connections to them. I'm just going to quickly go through two of those, which allow us to touch a little bit more on two others of the families. And so the first of these is Isidore Ephron's garage and taxi service. So Isidore Ephron, I guess, was the son of Ida Saraski. Ida Saraski was the lone daughter of that family of Saraski brothers. And she had married Morris Ephraim, and they had actually initially gone to St. Louis. He passed away 1917-ish kind of time frame. She comes to Aiken to be with her Saraski brothers, and her most of her 8 children follow her, including Isidore. And the family had a large number of different businesses in town, supermarkets and so forth. And we may talk about a number of those in the next session. But Isidore Ephraim started by developing a taxi business, and he would take, in particular, winter colony residents to and from the Aiken train station depot. And he had such a reputation for reliability that, in fact, there is a story that when George H.W. Bush was a child, he was being sent down here to spend time with his mother's family. And he was put on the train, and he was told when he got off the train to look for Mr. Isidore, and that's ultimately how he ended up getting and spending time with his grandparents, the Walkers, who had property in Barnwell. But not to be limited by just a taxi service, Isidore went on to build quite a multi-pronged enterprise. And what you see in this picture on the right is the building that is currently the front of the Carriage House Inn on Lawrence Street. And he ran a boarding house. That was his private residence, but a family residence. But he ran a boarding house out of that location. He rented automobiles. But if you see in the back where it talks about storage, he actually stored the cars of the winter colony residents when they left Aiken after the winter. So he had storage for up to 75 automobiles, which were kept in that warehouse in the back during the summer before folks would come back for the next winter. So that's a bit about Isidore Ephraim. And then lastly, here we'll talk about Julia's. And so there's probably no store more iconic in kind of the history of Aiken than Julia's dress shop. So Julia was Julia Wolfe, who was the wife of Jacob Wolfe, Jacob also having had a longstanding men's store in town. In 1932, Julia opened up a women's clothing store on Lawrence Street in the location that is currently Nandina, for people who know town here. And this store was a very, very high fashion women's clothing store. Julia ended up dressing most of the women in the winter colony, and the store built such a regional reputation that, in fact, people would come from Charleston and Atlanta and Charlotte to shop in this store. So again, that connection to the winter colony. So then just to finish with where we're going to end today, that success, the word of that success continued to get out. More and more Jewish families moved here, so that by 1950, there were over 20 Jewish owned merchant stores here in Aiken. Most of them on Lawrence Street, a few on Park Avenue and Richland, but basically, a big part of the commercial district downtown. And that's as far as we're going to go today. We're going to pick up next time, at least for this part, and we can talk a little bit more about these additional Jewish families and additional Jewish businesses that were here in town at that time. We'll go beyond that and talk a little bit more, highlighting the role of Jewish families in civic life here in Aiken and beyond. And we'll talk about women leaders, which is a theme of this community. Long before that was common, there are many strong, interesting women in the Aiken Jewish community who were in leadership roles. And then finally, we'll talk about how the community has changed over time, and in particular, talk about the influx of Jewish families tied to the Savannah River plant, and more recently, about retirees, and to kind of end with the current state of the Jewish community here. So that is as far as I'm going to take us today. So it's going to now be my honor to turn things over to some of our speakers. And I may need some help to figure out how to do that. But let's see. I want to start with so here. Front. Let's see. I'm going to stop the share. Let's see how that goes. Okay, see if that's helpful. So our first speaker is going to be Nelson Danish, who I think was sitting next to Stephen Sarasky when we talked before. So Nelson is the great grandson, I believe I've got that right, of Harris Louis H.L. Polaire, who's the first known Jewish merchant. For those of you who've watched the video, Nelson also did the voiceover for the video that I mentioned earlier. But I want to turn it over to Nelson. Each of the speakers now is going to talk a little bit about their family stories, their personal experiences, and maybe some reflections on the idea of 100 years of a Jewish community, a formal Jewish community here in Aiken.
Hey,
So
Steve, this is Steve. This is Steve. I guess you can't hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Very good. Perfect.
Except that when you went to, can you see us?
Yes, we can even. I can even see you.
Oh, okay. Because when you, anyway, we lost y'all, but that's okay.
Good.
Nelson?
Okay. So Nelson, your thoughts, your reflections, whatever it is you have to say.
Well, thank you for the information on H.L. Harris Louis Polaire, my great-grandfather by his first marriage. So I'm a direct descendant of him, and Steve, sitting next to me, Stephen Kent Sarasky, is a great-grandson of M.S. Polaire, his brother. When H.L. Sarasky's daughter and his wife at the time was an Anna Sutka Polaire, of whom nothing is known, married in Aiken. That was many years before the congregation was founded, and longer still before the synagogue was opened in 1925. They were married on a Sunday afternoon in 1896, May 31st, so 125 years ago this May, on the stage of the Lyceum Hall or the Opera House in downtown Aiken, long gone from Lawrence Street. A rabbi, I think he was a Polyakov from Augusta, came over to do the service, and the story was recalled in the Aiken Journal and Review a few days later, which is now the Aiken Standard, because it was a first for the town, so it was a lot of excitement about this wedding. Well, that evening, the honeymoon couple, because Abe Cohen, her husband, was from Augusta by that time, had moved to Augusta, and that's where they spent their lives. So their tie to Aiken began with the wedding here in Aiken. He died in 1930 and is buried in Magnolia Cemetery in Augusta. And grandmother, who was widowed, lived until 1944, and she lived with two of her daughters and son-in-law, my mother, her sister, my Aunt Pearl Polaire Cohen, and Joe Danish, my father. And again, we were in retail in Augusta with a store that started as the Augusta Beehive. And curiously, only recently, there turns out to be an Aiken Beehive that was owned by M.S. Polaire. And I doubt seriously whether these two stores were related at all, other than the name suggesting a busy place of business. And that store stayed in business at 972 Broad Street in Augusta until 1979, when the store was closed by all the adult children of Abe Cohen and Addie Rebecca Polaire Cohen. And of the 5 grandsons, they never had a granddaughter. I was the only one to ever work in the store. So that's basically my story as far as Aiken and Augusta is concerned. So now let's turn it over to my cousin, Steve, third cousin.
So,
Are you there?
yeah, I'm here, but yeah, you already did the handoff, so I was ready for Stephen to start speaking.
It's difficult because we lost our video. We can't see you at all. But first of all, I want to thank Steve Silver, the work he's put I'm invited to speak today because I am the last of the my
Stephen, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Saul Sarasky was my sir. Saul Sarasky was my paternal grandfather, and M.S. Fuller was my sister's maternal great grandfather. So I am the last of the clan here on the Sarasky side. I'm enough to be an exhibit at the museum myself. I'll add on here a little bit to what Steve has already told you about the HL and MS coming to Aiken. According to family lore, HL, people ask all the time, how did they end up in Aiken, South Carolina? And the family lore is that he suffered from a chronic respiratory disease, perhaps HL did, perhaps tuberculosis, because Aiken at that time, being on the highest ground between Charleston and Augusta, was actually known as a health resort. I'm not sure how true that. I know it was a health resort. We had several sanatoriums in Aiken at that time for people with respiratory diseases. So that's how HL and his brother, my great grandfather MS, came to Aiken, and then they invited their brother-in-law, B.M. Sarasky, to join them. B.M. started as a peddler also. All of the Sarasky brothers started as peddlers. From what I've been able to discern from what Steve has shown us today, it may be that my grandfather was one of the few unlicensed peddlers because they didn't find his license, but I know that he was started as a peddler. All of those folks that we spoke about so far, the Fullers and the Saraskis, their story began in the small Polish-Russian town of Kinishin. It was in Poland, but under the Russian rule. They spoke Russian and Yiddish. And B.M. Sarasky, when he came here, starting as a peddler, he roamed the countryside with the Russian English dictionary. They had thought that they had found heaven on earth when they moved to Aiken. And I would like to just quote from an article that was in the spring edition of the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina called Strangers in Paradise. You can find that by Googling it. But Hiram Sarasky, one of the four Sarasky brothers, wrote home to his wife, Fradel, who was still in Kinishin, from Aiken. And he said, Aiken is a place you could only dream of in Europe. No matter what street you travel on here, there are parks and alleys full of delightful aromas. And he described the parks and the parkways of Aiken and called it the Garden of Eden. And then he ended the letter, and most important, you can make a living here. And so the Jewish people were glad to, the family was glad to be here in Aiken, and other than what Steve was talking about, the tragic murder of our great uncle Abraham, they suffered no ill will toward the Aiken. The murder of Abraham is a very interesting story. We really don't have time today to go into that, but if you want to know more about it, if you just Google it, Abraham Sarasky, Aiken, South Carolina, there are numerous articles that have been written about that. It's an interesting story. I think what I would do now is just talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Aiken. I was born in 1947, and as I was growing up, the Jewish community here was interwoven into the fabric of the larger Aiken, the larger Aiken community, particularly in the business world. When I was in high school, for example, the girls, if they wanted to buy clothes, they would generally go to Julia's dress shop. If you were my age in high school and you wanted to buy your Gant shirts or Weegens, you would go to Owen Saraski, which was partially owned by Mandel Saraski, B.M. Saraski's son.
Stephen,
If-
we can't hear you very well.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Anyway, so what I
Don't
was-
turn sideways.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't turn sideways.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Again, I can't see anything, so I appreciate your information there. Anyway, so yeah, if you wanted to go clothes shopping, you went to Jewish stores. If you were a scout in Aiken, you would visit Mr. Persky's store, Nathan Persky, who was our religious leader after B.M. Saraski passed away in 1934. He was our religious leader until the mid-60s when he passed away. He had a department store downtown, and he was instrumental in bringing the scouts to Aiken and sold all the scout uniforms, badges, etc. If you wanted to go to the movies in Aiken, you went to either the Patricia or the Rosemary, who were the two daughters of Burt Ram, who owned Aiken's only theaters in Aiken. And if you needed anything from a hardware store, you either went to Laurel's or Francois's. Both married to Saraski girls, and they were brothers-in-law that had hardware stores right next to each other. So it's interesting, you had three Saraski stores back in the day next to each other, and hardware stores next to each other by brother-in-laws. And another family lore is the brothers got along fine, the wives not so much. A little bit about our services in Aiken when I was coming up. It was Eastern European tradition. I don't believe that the Jewish people in Aiken then were that observant. Now, B.M. Saraski was, or his wife Sarah certainly was, but that was before my time. While not particularly observant, they followed the Eastern European tradition. There were women on one side of the synagogue and the men on the other side of the synagogue. Nathan Persky conducted the whole service in Hebrew, not melodic Hebrew. He just dobbined his way through the whole service. It was torment for we young people.
True.
Yeah, right.
Horrible.
And Mitch, who Mitch is going to speak later, he was our shofar blower and did a great job. And then many years later, we didn't have anybody to do it. So I took over that job. Unfortunately, I think Peter got involved because the passersby and the neighbors of the synagogue thought we had reverted to the tradition of sacrificing large animals when I was blowing the ram's horn. But fortunately, Bill has now come to Aiken and has taken the mantle, and he does a great job with that. Aiken has been a great place for the Jewish people my age and my sister's age. We never suffered any overt discrimination whatsoever. And it was a great place to grow up, both as a Jew and as an Aikenite. And that's really, I'll just pass that on to you, Steve, to pass to the next speaker.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. That's really, really wonderful. I think I'm going to pass it on next to Mitch Rifkin, who's popped his head in at least a couple of times. So as a little bit of way of introduction, I mentioned the Ephraim family, of which Mitch is a descendant, and with its connections to the Saraski family. So Ida Saraski Ephraim, with many children, Isidore, who we talked about, but another son, Jake Ephraim, who had what was really the major grocery store in Aiken on Park Avenue that we may take a look at next time. And Mitch is a grandson of Jake Ephraim. So turn it over to Mitch, and he grew up here, and his recollections of time in Aiken and of this milestone.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Mitchell Rifkin, and I, along with my wife, Tonda, live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have 34-year-old boy-girl twin, Kyle and Molly, and a beautiful grandson named Levi. I left Aiken in 1967 I was in the apparel business for 40 plus years, and I'm now a retirement consultant. And Steven Sarasky is going to be my first client in Aiken if Pepe will let me retire. That's what he said. In the 1890s, as mentioned earlier, our families were all from the same town in Russia and came to America, first to New York and then settled in St. Louis, Missouri. Don't know why, but St. Louis, Missouri. In the 1920s, as Steve mentioned, my great-grandmother, Ida Sarasky, Ephraim, came to Aiken to be with her brothers along with her mother, Sophie Rose Sarasky. And that was after her husband Morris passed away in St. Louis. Along with her 7 children, Ida established there were many retailers. As Steve mentioned, my grandfather's store was a grocery store. My Uncle Isidore had a taxi business. Uncle Harry had a taxi business, and we had several millinery stores throughout Aiken. So it was kind of a wonderful time. My father, Marvin Rifkin, came to Aiken to marry my mother, Molly, in 1932. He opened an SO gas and dining room on US number 1 North called Marvin's. Specialty serving was fried shrimp. So wasn't kosher, but it made a living. We lived next door to the business with my 2 older sisters, Rawlene and Shirley. And I was the only baby Jewish boy. And according to my father, I was the second coming. And according to Mom, she confirmed that. So that was our story on me. My grandfather, Jake, and Helen Ephraim owned the grocery store on Park Avenue, and he catered to the northern clientele, as Stephen said, with specialty foods and to the tourism. Most Sundays, my Pappy Jake, as we called him, would cook for the family. And his specialties were steak and chop suey. Therefore, I take the responsibility for Jews eating Chinese on all holidays. It's my fault. At my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary in 1961, there were 5 generations present. It's kind of a milestone. Uncle Isidore's taxi stand, the carriage house. Every year, Uncle Isidore went to Europe for about a month. And each summer, I ran the taxi business beginning at age 16, a teenage boy's dream, believe me, until my mother came along and set up too many rules. That went away. I was bar mitzvahed in 1957 by Nathan Persky, who was an incredible man and had the patience of Job, especially with me. I blew chauffeur through high school and college, and proving that the Ephraim's family is full of hot air, and my cousin Stephen continues the tradition today in Charlotte. As a kid, the synagogue, as Stephen said, didn't hold a lot of fun memories for me. Hard benches, Mom being on one side, Dad being on the other side, all in Hebrew, and a lot of shushing going on if the kids made a sound. I grew up in a segregated environment, graduated in 1962, and I personally never witnessed prejudices of any kind, or certainly anti-Semitism. I presently serve as the chairman of the North Carolina Holocaust Foundation here in Charlotte. I attribute to the Jewish families of Aiken, especially Mandel Sarasky and Nathan Persky, being such good citizens of the city for our love and like of our community. Coming back, I see the changes, but I do recall how I left it and where all the businesses were and where I got into all the trouble I did, and there were many places. But the rock of all of our time together was our 100-year-old synagogue, which solidified my Jewishness, and were not a lot of Jewish families in Aiken at that time. But during the high holidays, we swelled to standing room only. We were all mishpacha. As I look back to then versus today, growing up in Aiken was a beyond great experience. I was surrounded by my aunts and uncles and lots of cousins. I am and was truly blessed. I wish that all Aikenites realize the jewel that Aiken is, and let us all become mishpacha.
Great. Thank you, Mitchell. That was fantastic. So we have one more set of speakers, and they are members of the Polyakov family that we just talked about, and I'm going to introduce Stuart Fine and his grandson Sam Pranikoff. So Stuart is the grandson of Jacob S. Polyakov, who we talked about earlier, who was both a peddler here and then had a longstanding store in town that lasted, I think, until the 1930s. So let me introduce Stuart. Stuart didn't grow up here, but he has been back to Aiken for several of the reunions that we've had here. Stuart, why don't you lead us off, and then I think it's wonderful to have Sam also say a few words and to kind of show how this story continues to live on in younger generations of a number of these families. So Stuart, on to you.
Thank you, Steve. Please let me know if you're having trouble hearing me. I guess I'd like to begin by thanking you, Steve and Bill and Doris Baumgarten and so many others for putting this program together. Obviously, it was a monumental effort, but hopefully also a labor of love. As you mentioned, I am the grandson of J.S. and Rebecca Polyakov, who owned and operated J&R Polyakov until 1937. Unfortunately, I never knew my grandfather. He passed away in 1937. I was born in 1942. My mother, Gussie, was the fourth child of their 6 children. The others were Louis Polyakov, Lily Shapiro, Bennett Polyakov, Sadie Levy, and Belle Bedaines, whose daughter, Ellie Schwartzberg, living in Phoenix, is on this video conference right now. My mother left Aiken in 1937 and moved to Baltimore, which is where I grew up, but she spoke often lovingly of Aiken, of her friends there. The 2 names that I remember the most were Doris Sarasky, who became Dorothy Surratt. I don't know where she fits into the family, but I know she was one of the Saraskis. And the other was members of the Wolf family. I made my first trip to Aiken in 1950. The occasion was a family wedding at the Sheraton Bonaire Hotel in Augusta, Georgia. And we spent a couple of nights at the Hotel Henderson in Aiken, which burned down a number of years ago. I remember visiting Julia Wolf at her dress shop, which I remember is quite elegant, even though I was just 8 years old at the time, and also at her home on Whiskey Road. I also met all 3 of her daughters, Ida, who had her own dress shop and her own home, Annie, and Becky. Ida actually visited us in Baltimore a few times en route to buying trips in New York for her store. And Becky Wolf, who was one of my mother's close friends, actually was introduced to one of my father's friends, and they married, but their marriage was relatively short-lived because Becky died prematurely of breast cancer. My mother spoke not only about her friends, she spoke about school, about the Aiken Institute. She spoke about her social life in the South. And she also spoke about the rich Yankees who came down in the winter to play polo. One of those Yankee families eventually became my patients, but I never mentioned to them that my mother referred to them as the rich Yankees from New York. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. Most of what I learned about Aiken didn't come until 60 years after that first trip in 1950. And that was in 2010 when my wife, Ellie, who was sitting right next to me, and I decided to drive from Winston-Salem, where we now live, with our daughter and her family, down to Aiken. And by dumb luck, I had gotten in touch with Doris Baumgarten through the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina. And Doris sent me a package several inches thick that came with more information than I could ever have imagined. I didn't know, for example, that my father, J.S., my grandfather, was one of the founders of the synagogue. I didn't know that he and the other 3 or 4 men were also the people who were the founders of the Sons of Israel Cemetery. I did know that the ancestral home was at 911 Pendleton and that the store was on Main Street, but of course I was never able to see the store because that was destroyed in a fire. But Doris was our guide for 2 consecutive days, and she took us on the $50 tour of Aiken. A few months later, while I was with my cousin Ellie Schwartzberg and another of other cousins in Charlotte, North Carolina, attending a family bar mitzvah, I began talking over lunch about how enthusiastic I was about learning more about my Aiken ancestry and the contributions that my grandfather had made to the congregation, the cemetery, and so forth. And there was a rather spontaneous outburst from a number of cousins who said, well, we'd love to go to Aiken. At which point, at that lunch, I said, well, how about if we all get together sometime later this year? And so that was the beginning of the first Polykoff family reunion in Aiken in December of 2011. Not only my immediate relatives, first and second cousins, but also cousins from Minneapolis, from Sioux City, Iowa, New York City, Binghamton, New York, and even from Sydney, Australia came. And the word got around, and so we had Ed Polykoff and his family from Columbia, Gary Polykoff and his family from Spartanburg, Todd Lerner, my cousin by marriage from New York, and we had a wonderful 2 days. Our program was that we had a group dinner at the Wilcox on Friday evening. We had a wonderful service, a Shabbat service on Saturday morning at the temple, followed by an oneg put on by the temple sisterhood. From there, we walked to the cemetery and visited the grave sites of my grandparents, which I had never seen until my trip earlier with Doris. And I walked from the grave site to the grave site and saw the graves of people either that I had met in my 1950 trip or that I had heard my mother speak of. And I felt like I was visiting with my friends. And each time I stood before a tombstone, I was trying to remember what my mother had said about them. It was a remarkable experience and one which I'll never forget. That afternoon, we had a tour of Hitchcock Woods, which Doris had arranged, led by a professor of biology at USC Aiken. That evening, we had another group dinner, and then we visited the Polo Hall of Fame. And following Sunday brunch, the group departed. It was such an enjoyable experience, and there were so many cousins who weren't able to make it that we organized a second Polykoff reunion 2 years later in December 2013 that was attended by some of the repeat participants as well as some cousins who couldn't make it the first time. One person who made it on both occasions was my grandson, Sam Pranikoff, and that has engendered an interest in the family in him, which he's going to tell you about right now.
Great.
Great, thank you. And first of all, I'd love to thank Steve, Doris, Bill, and everyone else who made this event possible. It's wonderful to be here with everyone. So as mentioned, my name is Sam Pranikoff, and I'm Stuart Fine's grandson, which makes me JS and Julia Rebecca's great-great-grandson. Despite growing up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a mere 3.5 hours away, my first exposure to Aiken came, as mentioned, during the first family reunion that my grandfather organized. I had heard about my great-grandmother's, Stuart's mother's, Southern origins at various points throughout my childhood, but before the trip, I had never really taken the opportunity to explore it in greater detail. It was both unique and special to be there in person, to walk in my family's footsteps and see the place that played such a major role in the lives of my ancestors. As my grandfather mentioned, we spent the weekend taking a walk back in time, learning about Aiken's history, and importantly about the tight-knit Jewish community JS contributed meaningfully to. Hard to believe, but over a century ago. As a Jew that grew up in the South, despite being born 57 years after my great-great-grandfather's death in 1937, I was soon struck by this special sense of connection with my ancestors based upon my own Jewish experience. Like them, as a Jew that grew up and lived in the Carolinas, I too was a member of a very small minority of a much larger population with little to no knowledge or understanding of Jewish culture or tradition. As an ambassador of Jewish culture in Aiken and a founder of Adath Yeshurun, I thought about how JS must have taken pride in his culture and sought to educate those with no prior exposure to Jews during a very different time than today in our country. During my own childhood, as one of just a few Jews at my own school, I thought back to the countless conversations I had with friends explaining Jewish Christmas, along with other holidays and facets of Jewish culture. That connection ultimately manifested in my taking a deep dive into researching the Polikoff family history. I've since mapped a significant portion of the family tree, uncovering dozens of J.S. and Julia Rebecca's great-great-grandchildren, who are my third cousins, scattered all over the country and the world. In addition, it's prompted me to recognize the importance of preserving and sharing my family history. I'm in the process of comprehensively digitizing all family records and photos. And, my motivating factor for this is just to ensure that others in the future will be able to take the same journey I did to better understand their own heritage. I'll conclude just by saying that my experience couldn't have happened without the work of many on this Zoom today. I want to thank each and every one of you for your role in helping me discover my family's past and to see their legacy, which endures to this day. I'm confident that JS and Julia Rebecca would be thrilled if they could see this gathering. And finally, thank you for allowing me to be part of the event. I hope to meet all of you when I visit Aiken next year.
Great. Thanks, Sam. And we do have some time left before we said we were going to run this till about 6:30. So if people have questions that they'd like to ask, maybe the best way, given the number of people that are on the line, would be for people to type into the chat function, which you can see on the bottom, and to everyone, if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make. There's been some work in the chat function, and then maybe some of the speakers or whatever can answer. I see there's already a chat to Sam that we can add. Before you answer that one, Sam, I just want to remark that so we mentioned we're going to be doing another of these in a month. That's going to focus more on the later Jewish community. But I do want to mention again that next year we're going to be opening the exhibit at the Aiken County Historical Museum, which will be another chance to delve into this history, as well as a set of artifacts from some of these stores that people can look at. And we're going to have a Centennial celebration weekend that very first weekend in March, which will be at least one opportunity, and hopefully even others at other points for people to celebrate together. And one of the things that we're working on for that, and there's going to be a lot of different events over that weekend. But as you can see from some of those maps, a lot of these locations are pretty close together. And so we're working on trying to create a walking tour of some of these sites that we can do together next year, and potentially formalize and make that walking tour something that is available to anybody, any visitor that comes to Aiken that wants to explore this history. So I guess I'll start I guess, Sam, if you quickly want to say what you do, and then maybe we'll move to Ann.
Happy to. Sandy and Doreen, to answer your question, I work in venture capital and am currently working remotely for a firm in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay. So then Ann Hipp, Stephen's sister, maybe you had indicated you want to share a story. If you can unmute yourself if you're are muted, and then the floor is yours.
Okay, this was just a very small anecdote. I'm 6 years Stephen's junior, so I'm the baby sister of the family. And when I was in junior high school at Aiken Junior High, I had a best friend then, and a guy we were standing in the lunch line, and a guy in front of me or behind me said something about he was going to Jew somebody down. And my friend took her foot and stomped so hard on his foot. And she is still my best friend 50, 60 years later. And I just thought I'd share that story. That was the only time I really heard things like that. But it was so great to have a friend who stood up for me like that.
That's great. And I just as a reflection, I did not grow up here, but one of the attractions I think of this town is at least an aspiration around tolerance and inclusion that I think is something to be nurtured here, and that I think a lot of people would support. That doesn't mean, that there isn't bias and hatred everywhere, including here. But I think one of the things that happened in Aiken, and Mitchell mentioned this in particular, because of the prominence of some of the Jewish families here in civic life. We'll talk more about Nathan Persky next time, and more about Mandel Sarasky next time. But their prominence in the community was both a reflection of that attitude, but also was kind of reinforced, I think, that the Jewish community here was accepted as part of the broader community.
And I always felt accepted. The only thing I hated was when a holiday fell on a Friday night and I couldn't go to a football game.
Great. So I see Michael Cohen has asked a question about the significance of the Hebrew letter in the logo, which I can say I didn't know before we designed the logo, but it is the Hebrew letter reflecting the number 100. So that's the Hebrew letter for reflecting the number 100. So that's the story there. And then Robin Dudley, I think, is asking about the research effort that has been done, how it's been funded. Largely how it's been funded is a bit of a bootstrap issue, although, as I mentioned, we did get significant funding from some foundations, especially SC Humanities, which is largely allowing us to turn that research into an exhibit and into a number of other other elements of the project, including paying for the historic marker that we described and so forth. But the research effort, we were lucky that the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina, as I mentioned, had done already quite a bit of documentation, at least of the stories of some of the early Jewish families. And then once we made the relationship with the museum, it turned out that one of the things that the museum was able to give us access to was a digital subscription to the Aiken Standard, which allowed us to go back and look at all of the archival newspaper articles from the Standard. And they had done a very good job of creating a digital archive that went back to 1900 and a little bit before. And so knowing the names of the families and knowing the names of a lot of the stores, we were able to go and search and find advertisements from those stores and articles that were written about the families and obituaries or feature articles that were written about some of the notable people, mentioning like Mandel Sarasky and Nathan Persky and so forth. And a lot of those advertisements had a street address on them, and there was a bit of a task to try to turn some of the older street addresses into the current street addressing, because Aiken actually went from a linear street addressing system to a compass system, which is the northwest, south, northeast, southwest kind of system. But we found actually a Rosetta Stone in what is the Sanborn insurance map, fire insurance maps, which actually had both sets of addressing systems on the maps. And we were actually able then to figure out what were the storefronts. And we had old archival photos in some cases and so forth. So again, a lot of work had been done, but one of the things that exists here that has never been assembled before is as complete an archive of the locations and the stories of a lot of these Aiken Jewish merchant stores. And if you also go look, I think Stuart mentioned about his grandfather's house on Pendleton Street. We've also identified the locations and have some pictures of some of the houses of some of these Jewish families as well. So. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I couldn't get my chat room to work. There was just one little story I think would be interesting to this group, which I neglected to mention, and then has to do with socialization. You know, there were always a relatively small number of Jewish families in Aiken. And in the early part of the 20th century, there was very little interfaith dating and socialization. So my mother, probably like her sisters and many of the other Jewish young women, would plan to attend dances and parties wherever they existed in the South. It could be Charlotte, it could be Raleigh, it could be Charleston, Atlanta, Augusta. I don't know that she ever went as far as New Orleans. And one of my mother's sisters mentioned to me once that my mother was very aggressive, that when she would hear about a certain function to be in Charlotte, it could be 6 or 9 months later, she would put it on the calendar and say, I just want you all to know I'm not going to be able to work in the store that weekend. I'm going to be in Charlotte. Anyway, as far as that 9/11 Pendleton, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Steve Sarasky for arranging for our family reunion to be able to visit and walk through all the rooms of the ancestral home there, which is now the Johnson Law Offices. Unfortunately, there is no one still alive who could tell us who slept in which room and where the dog slept and so forth. But it was a wonderful experience to be walking through the rooms where I know that my mother, her 5 siblings, and their parents lived for a number of years, starting in 1912. So thank you for letting me share those 2 anecdotes.
Great. I don't see another question in the chat. There's a question that says, Steve, your last name means what? I maybe think that maybe to Steven Sarasky. I don't know. If it's to me, I don't have an answer.
The only thing I know, and it's not a very interesting answer, is that in Poland, Russia, the SKY generally signified where you were from. And there is a little town near Kinnishon where my family came from, Saras, I think it is, or Sarat, something like that. Anyway, I think that's the
I'm the only one that's didn't have a picture.
Great.
This is Nelson Danish again.
Yeah.
For those of you who have seen the 2014 issue, the November 2014 issue of the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina Bulletin, my grandparents' wedding photograph is on the cover, but there are 2 eras in the story, both of which are mine. I speak of Justine Wise, Tulin, later Polair's father, as being the rabbi for Temple Emmanuel. He was the Free Synagogue rabbi. And also it mentions Belle Mittel. Her husband was Dave, not Harold, as it says in the story. So those corrections for those of you who are keeping up with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. And that magazine, there's a link to that magazine on the website that we went through today. There's a page of additional resources that you'll find there that has a link to a lot of background information, but including to that magazine. And I just make another comment, especially to the folks who have a family connection to the history that we've talked about today. The website that you've just looked at, if you do go through it and you find that there's something that we got wrong, or if there's something important that you think that you missed, or even better, if you have access to old archival photographs that might enhance the telling of the story, we'd love to get access to that and add it to the story. One of the benefits of that is that this material, I think, as Sam was saying about his family, the motivation relative to his family tree research, is that this will live on. I mean, we're here to celebrate this milestone, and but this as a resource is going to live on, and if we can make it better, so much the better. So,
Steve,
yeah,
I'm wondering if you will have a print copy of this, because the conversations in print would be wonderful to have, so you could take your time and really look at those archival pictures and hear what everybody said.
right.
I don't know if people would be interested in purchasing that or not, or if they're just happy just having a copy of a digital copy of what's going on.
Right. So one of the things we are doing, I think that Bill maybe mentioned up front, is we have been recording this session. So one of the things that we're going to try to do in the next week or so is to post a link to this session on that website so that anybody can go back and watch it again, maybe fast forward through the parts that they're not interested in, but listen to the parts that they do want. So that's one thing that we're going to do. Another thing that we're going to do, and this relates to the Centennial celebration weekend next year, is we are going to create a catalog or a booklet that people will be able to take away with them from that weekend, and maybe even people who attend the exhibit will be able to take. Maybe there'll be a purchase fee associated with that. I'm not sure. But we do want to create that catalog, and it'll have a little bit about the exhibit. But one of the things that we wanted to do is to have some of the stories that people have told today be about some of the families be put into that into that booklet for people to read. So some of the speakers that we've had, and so one thing that we may do is to try to record some of those talks and get them written down, maybe send them back to the speakers to edit, and then include that into this printed catalog.
Okay, Steve, I want to let you know what an incredible job you've done. I mean, I gave you, like 3 words, and you ran with it and did such deep, detailed information that I never knew. Well, I don't use computer. But the follow-up information that you continued with blows my mind. I think this was absolutely incredible. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
I never thought it would get off the ground, and but I guess I should have been such a pessimist. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That means a lot to me coming from you, Doris. Thank you. And I will say it's a little bit of be careful what you ask for when you say you're going to volunteer to do something like this, that it's certainly been quite a task. And I will say I'm looking forward to doing this one and doing the one in a month, and then maybe taking a break for a little bit. But as some of you know, but some of you don't, just as a little bit of background. So I grew up in the New York area. I did not have a family connection to Aiken, but I did have a branch of my family that came to South Carolina in the 1840s. And it was actually in the course of researching that family history, a bit like Sam was talking about, that I found that there was an archive with papers about my family that existed at the Addleston Library at the College of Charleston. And that's what got me down there. And I met Dale Rosengarten down there, who some of you know. And she's the one who got me in touch with the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina. And then meeting you, Doris, and Della, and being a member of the synagogue here got me to think about this milestone being an opportunity to share this story with a broader group of people, and through that process to try to bring more awareness to the Jewish community here, and hopefully even potentially attract maybe some new members to the synagogue. So we'll see how that goes, but we're on our way in that process. So good. If there are not further questions.
Steve, excuse me, someone asked when the next session is to be. Isn't that April 18th, a Sunday at 5 o'clock?
It is same time, April 18th, and will have a similar format. I will talk, I don't think quite as long, but I will share some new material that tells and updates the story from the 1950s up through today. And we're going to have a series of additional speakers. I didn't see whether he was on today, but Mort Persky, who's Nelson Persky's son, who's I think 90 or almost 90, living in New York City, We're trying to get him to connect and participate. Morris Rudnick, son of Irene Rudnick and Harold Rudnick, as many of you know, and nephew of Herbert Rudnick, another important part of the story. He'll speak. I think Doris mentioned that we're going to try to have her reflect a few words. I think Ernie Levinson, we're maybe going to try to get to talk, and Bill Schuster, I think, is going to wrap things up with some thoughts about where the Jewish community is today. So that's going to be the program on the 18th of April.
Steve,
Yep.
have you been in touch with Irene's daughter, Helen Rappaport? She has all of the archives
Yeah.
of her mother.
Gotcha. I've been in touch with Morris, and I've been in touch with their cousin, who's daughter of Herbert, who in particular helped me understand his history and his prominence, which is really another. Irene is obviously is a very important figure in this history, but Herbert Rudnick is also.
Because he was her campaign manager when she ran for Senate.
Harold was the campaign manager, but Harold's brother Herbert was very prominent. He was actually awarded the Order of the Palmetto by Richard Riley when he was governor, which is
because of his work with mental. He was with his work with mental. Right.
Exactly. So
the more we talk, the more the brain cells begin to develop.
all good. I know we could continue this, and I'm happy to leave it on if people want to chat. But I think let's see, we'll do a going once, twice.
Well, there was
stay on the line.
There was a last question on there, Steve.
Okay, and what did I miss? From
Turbo, something about how many Jewish people are in Aiken.
That's actually a good question. Bill, are you still on the line? I think we don't have good data on that. I know that we were talking about that question before. It's something we wish we knew more of.
Yeah, we know who's affiliated. There have been estimates by Rabbi Shai over in Augusta of the whole area, the CSRA, of saying that he thought there were well over 1,000 families, but we don't have good data on that.
Aiken. Yeah.
We have about 75 paid members, I believe, in our congregation now. Some of them are out-of-town members, and some of them are local in Wrightsville.
Yeah, I think Stephen was just saying that there's between 50 and 60 members of the congregation at this point, depending on how you count. Okay, and someone has just put into the chat about 1,500 in the CSRA. One of the things that we do know is that there are a pretty significant number of unaffiliated Jewish families in the Aiken area. There's quite a number of retirees that have moved to this area. A proportion of them are Jewish and haven't necessarily chosen to affiliate with the synagogue since they're down here. And so certainly through this process, it's a chance for them to get to know a little bit about the history of the town in which they're living. CSRA stands for Central Savannah River Area, I believe, which is the Augusta Aiken Metro. It's a acronym for the metro area, and we get all the Augusta TV stations. And Nelson, who's I'm looking at now, has a history that some of you may know as having worked at WJBF in Augusta for many, many years. So,
Jesus Jewish.
Good. Okay, so if I don't hear going once, going twice.
We'll probably see that before they leave.
Bye, thank you.
Very good. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for attending.
Shalom to one and all.
Yeah, absolutely. And we look forward to seeing people again on the 18th of April, and we look forward to being in person next year. Thank you so much for being here. And
Active speaker.
bye-bye now.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
The active speaker.